it. So now we are going to use that to create some SMART goals. So what I have learned in my too many years of playing too many sports, but primarily with derby, is that a lot of times we don't set good goals for like our current ability or our current circumstances. So what I learned early on was a lot of my goals had like financial ties, and I was not in a financial place to really meet those goals. So I set myself up for failure, right? Or my goals had to do with like being at an elevated level that I realistically wasn't going to obtain in the time frame that I wanted to. And so again, I'm setting myself up for failure and disappointment because I'm not being realistic about like, is that attainable? Is that like, you know, so being thoughtful about, are you setting goals for your current state, you know, for your current financial situation, your current resources, right? Like who's going to help you? How are you going to get there? All of the whys and the who's and the whatnots, right? So we're going to take all of this into consideration as we go through each letter in the word SMART. But yeah, just thinking about like a right and a wrong way to set goals, essentially, is the purpose of this. And then obviously knowing that like a well-formulated goal sets you up for success, like beyond just your ability to actually meet the goal, if that makes sense, right? So having a well-tailored goal, it motivates you, right? It builds intrinsic motivation to actually do it versus, you know, maybe like a less tailored or unrealistic goal can actually be like demotivating, right? It can kind of feel like, oh, well, I'm not going to get there, so what's the point, right? So it can actually be counterintuitive. So yeah, so let's start with S. So specific, right? So we want our goals to kind of answer these questions as best we can. All the who, what, when, where's, and why's. Under what conditions? What are your limitations? Why is this important to you? So you want to answer as much or as many of these as you can, as thoroughly as you can, in order to have the most specific, clearly stated, most achievable goal that you can possibly outline. So, for example, right, if you're just like, my goal is to be a better skater, you need to say, you know, you need to be like, what exactly do you want to achieve? Like, where are you going to practice? How are you going to like get those skills? How are you going to hone those skills more, right? Like, when are you going to be able to carve out time to work on this? Who's going to help you? What are the conditions and limitations, right? Is there like a financial constraint? Is there a limitation on time or daylight or, you know, places to do it? And why is it important to you? So we need to know all of these things in order to take what is a wonderful goal of, I want to improve as a skater, and tease out all of the smaller goals that go into that so that you can prioritize what comes first, like, you know, and start to create building blocks that are actually achievable so that you can feel like, okay, now I'm making progress, right? Now I'm checking things off. This starts to feel good. Questions about the specific piece? Okay. So moving on to the measurable piece. So we have to be able to measure a goal or an objective, right? So like me thinking clinically in the way that my work operates, the goal is the umbrella, the big thing, right? So the goal is to be a better skater. So then breaking it down into sort of like a SMART goal, which I would call an objective, those are the building blocks, right? Those are like the steps that you take to reach that big umbrella goal. So in order to know if we're able to check those boxes, if we're taking those steps appropriately, we need to be able to measure it, right? Because otherwise it's like, well, who's to say? Am I a better skater today versus last week? I don't know. I need a way to measure that, right? So it's how much, how will I know? What's the indicator? So it could be endurance based, right? So that this is where like laps was really useful, or your ability to just be on skates for longer, right? Even like I can skate more laps around my neighborhood, or I can stand to be on my toe stops for longer, or maybe I can do a 2-minute plank versus a 30-second plank, right? It's whatever, however you want to measure it, right? Knowing what you need as far as the specific piece. So once you've chunked out, like, okay, these are the specifics that I need to be a better skater, then you can start to be like, okay, and I'm going to measure that by whatever that looks like. But it's got to be quantifiable. Otherwise, it makes it murky. And murky goals are not specific or measurable or useful, really, right? So as best you can, make it about like a time frame, right? So you're extending your endurance for something, or you're increasing your like specific ability to like nail a skill. So like in the sense that like, oh, this would get checked off by London, right? Because I'm able to like nail this specific skill in this way. That's measurable, right? Because we would know where you're at with that. It's another way you can measure it. Time's a measurable piece, right? So like, again, being on skates for a certain amount of time, or being able to do a certain number of something. I think I said that actually. I may be repeating myself at this point. Does this make sense though, as far as like making sure that you have a way to measure so that you can check that box for yourself? I think I feel like this is probably the most important part. I mean, they're all very important and they go together, but knowing, like you having in your brain, like, this is what I need to do. This is what it looks like when I'm doing it. And I can check that box. That's like the gratifying piece, right? That's like that intrinsic motivation piece. It's like, yes, I did it. So, and this can also be the biggest hurdle for people, like figuring out how to make things measurable. We can do all the other things, but if it's not measurable, it's not a useful tool. Okay, attainable. So again, like, as I mentioned, a lot of my SMART goals when I first started Derby had financial components. So I wanted to eat better. I wanted to join a gym. I wanted to be able to go to clinics and trainings for Derby, right? Like, and all of these things required money. I wanted new gear. I wanted new skates, like, because I felt like these would help make me a better skater. And they probably would have, but I didn't have the money for them. So you have to assess and take inventory of, what do I have resources for right now, right? That's going to help me reach this measurable specific goal. And what are your specific capabilities? So this is where I was saying, like, a lot of times people are like, I want to be a better skater. Like, I want to look like Scald Eagle or Much Mayhem or Freight Train, right? Or Lady Trample. I want to be like that skater. And it's like, yeah, that's a great goal to have. Like, how do we chunk that out, right? So what do you have capability to do right now that's going to help you get there, but in a realistic and attainable way now, today, this week, this month, right? And then answering those questions and being like, if you don't have the resources or the capabilities right now, what are you missing? How can you achieve that goal? So maybe before you can achieve your small goal, you have to do something else, right? So I need to set up a GoFundMe. I need to ask my parents for an early birthday present. I need to find a side hustle to make more money to buy new skates. I'm going to check out roller derby recyclables. I'm going to tap into my network, right? Whatever you got to do. To get the resources in order to meet that goal, but know for yourself that you can't reach that goal until you have those resources. You can work on something else, but it's like, so for yourself, you're not like beating yourself up, right? And like getting down on yourself with that negative self-talk. If you don't have the resources, you can't achieve the goal. And then this is a big one. Have others done it successfully before? A lot of times I feel like we waste a lot of time and energy reinventing the wheel, where it's like so many people like have come before us in roller derby, right? Like they have trailblazed, they have written the books, literally. Like there is so much information out there. If people just ask. And so a lot of times I feel like, again, people feel like so siloed in derby, where it's like, oh, well, maybe I'm not as good as that person and I don't feel like I'm on their level, and so I can't ask them for help. Ask them for help, right? Like if you see someone that's like, man, you just really got that thing down, or you seem really knowledgeable about this thing, like tap into your resources or ask them for a resource. But I feel like a lot of times, again, we get really bogged down with trying to find information that we could way more easily access if we would just ask, right? And use our network and our resources. So if other people have done it successfully before, use their model, as long as you think it will work for you and it's specific, measurable, and attainable, right? Like, yeah, there's a lot of blogs out there. There's a lot of people that have done the things that we're trying to do. We can reach out and ask them. Relevant. So this is where I was talking before about like making sure that we are setting, I can't remember what language I used before, but basically that we're setting the correct goal for what we want right now, right? So it's like we're recognizing that large umbrella, but we're setting targeted goals to get there, knowing that it's not going to be like one step, right? But there's going to be flights of stairs to get to the roof, right? Like we're trying to get up there, and we will, but it's one step at a time, and we got to figure out what each of those steps entails. So the main question here is, who are you doing it for? It's got to be you for Derby, right? Like it's not going to be anybody else. But if it is, like if there is some sort of like, oh, I'm doing this so that so-and-so will think I'm cool, or so that, I don't know, right? Like if there is some of that, you need to know that, because that can impact your motivation for certain things. And you need to know about those landmines that you could potentially step on down the line, right? Because that's going to help you set better goals around those things. So if our motivation is not purely for us, like purely intrinsic, if there's some external motivation, that's cool too. We just need to know how that impacts us. Right. So if it's like, oh yeah, I'm only doing it to look cool for this person, it's like, well, what happens if that person moves or doesn't care anymore or doesn't come to see you? Is that going to stop you working hard or like trying to achieve that goal? Right. So yeah, really being transparent with yourself, like do an inventory of that. Who are you doing it for? Yeah. And then just, I mean, like I said, it's way more important to do it for you, right? Like it's important to do everything for you first. You can also have other ulterior motives as well. But I think if you're not ultimately doing it for you and the betterment of you as a skater, and like your empowerment and your health and whatever other things are sort of intertwined with that, I think you're going to struggle. I'll just put that out there. I think it's really difficult to stay on task and moving towards a goal that's difficult, that requires a time commitment and like it's physical and demanding, right? It's really hard to stay on task with that when we're not entirely doing it for us. So I don't think either of you are in that position, but just to be thoughtful. If something comes up and you're like, oh, I don't really like that piece, I really only do that because so-and-so asks me, be thinking about this and be like, huh, okay. How much does that impact these other goals that I've set up? Mm-hmm. All right. And then time bound. So you have to give yourself a deadline, right? I am terrible for this. So, or like, I'm always the one that like asks for timelines, like give me a deadline, because otherwise it won't get done, right? It will get put on my never ending to-do list and it will continuously get pushed down unless you give me a deadline. So give yourself a deadline. What's the deadline for your goal, right? And that goes for your big umbrella goal as well as your chunks. And you got to be realistic with it, right? But the chunks can have fairly short deadlines because you can always adapt. If you're like, oh, I wasn't able to meet that goal this month, I'm going to reset it. I'm going to adjust it, right? I'm going to kind of figure out what part of it I struggled with. I'm going to get some support with the challenges, and I'm going to reset the deadline for next month. Boom. Right. And then I think being realistic with yourself about like your big picture goal, but understanding that that's a moving target as well, because obviously your chunks are going to be moving targets. So I think also holding on to that piece that Evil very eloquently articulated of just any progress is enough, right? Like you are working towards it, and also having a deadline keeps you honest about it, right? So it's a dialectic. We'll hold both of those things to be true. Yeah. Okay. Do you guys have any questions about any element of a SMART goal? Okay. So I'm going to give you a couple minutes to apply these elements to some of your initial thoughts from the beginning exercise. And I want you to come up with at least one SMART goal for this 6-week timeline. So it can be something that you achieve this week if you would like, or it can be something you achieve next year. It doesn't matter, right? Like, it doesn't have to be something that you achieve within the 6-week timeline, although it can be. And we can help keep each other accountable. But yeah, at least one specific SMART goal that's going to help you achieve your big umbrella goal. Okay, so I'm going to turn the music back on for you. I'll give you a couple minutes, and then we will move on.